Hello, I'm Tim Wilde, and this is a Wilde Discourse on the recent news that happened. It's like a week and plus ago. It's been a little bit about the church having to pay there was a $5 million settlement. The church, I guess, had to pay a $1 million of the five to the SEC for a settlement because of some forms and some sketchy reporting that was done for some of their investments. Sorry, there's a lot of racket going on with the wind on my roof. So sorry for any background noise. But I wanted to ask my friend Lance Carlile to join me. He's been on the show before. He works for the church. He's not necessarily a specialist in this field, in this area. Doesn't have any inside information. He doesn't have any, there's no like disclaimer or anything that we need to make other than everything we're about to say is his personal opinion. The reason I wanted to bring him on and have a conversation about it is because he might be able to explain some of this, but I don't know, because I don't know how much he knows about it. But I always value Lance's perspective when there's scandals and things that come out that people are panicking about. And I actually have had at least one person that's been persistent, but I've had a couple people ask me my thoughts about it. And it's not like I know anything better than anyone else, and I'm not more deep or insightful than anyone else, but someone asked me and I have my platform, so whatever, I'm just going to share what I have to say. And I read a couple articles, including the church's statement today, and I'm going to read it with Lance. It's pretty short, and then we're going to just discuss it, just give you our thoughts about what this says about the church, its integrity and its reporting and whatever. So I'm bringing on Lance, and he's in this is going to be like one of those can you find like a Where's Waldo kind of a picture, and see if you can see him in this busy room. Oh, and then he gets up. What a dork. Anyway, there's Lance. Lance, thanks for being on Wilde Discourse. I'm going to put up the title of our show, which is discussing the church's SEC settlement. And I'm going to pop up here the church's official statement in a second. I also have the CNN business article that was just saying what the news was, but before we get into the actual statement, Lance, what did you read, or what is your exposure to this?
So, I mean, I think this has been making news headlines for a while. So last year, I guess there was a guy that leaked like that the church had like had more investments than they were telling people about, or something similar to that. And they did mention it at work, and they said, this is happening, and don't act like you represent the church if you want to express your opinion. So again, this is just me and my opinion. I don't represent the church or the corporation or any of that. And like Tim said, I don't have any insider information any more than probably Tim does. But I do work there, so I do know how seriously they take the church's finances.
Yeah.
I know that the interesting thing about the church and its finances is there's law, and there's certain things you have to do no matter who you are, and if you're a church or if you're not a church. And the church always goes above and beyond what's required of them. The requirements might be if you have this transaction, then you have to have at least one other person witness it. The church will have 2 or 3 other people witnessing it.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to read the statement and see. And then I just know I heard on the news that they were fined, and I guess
there's a $5 million settlement. Yeah. And with what you just said too, the practice and how they handle those funds sacredly. And this wasn't paid with tithing funds that we're going to say. This was paid off by the investment funds, and this was an investments disclosure issue. But Lance, you also served in some kind of a ward level, like a stake level auditing capacity, going around just seeing how bishoprics handled their funds and everything. I mean, there's a little bit more perspective on how serious the church takes the finances. And it's a lot of people, there's been a lot of leaks in the last few years about how much money the general authorities make and stuff like that. And people are like, oh my gosh, there's this money, and the church has all this money, and there's people starving in Africa. Why aren't we doing more? All this stuff. There's nothing sketchy from what I read here. There's nothing sketchy really about what was going on. But here's my question for you, Lance, about before we get into this. Why is there, and this isn't like I have a problem with this, I'm just want to see what your answer would be. Why is there a need for the privacy of disclosing how much money the church has and all that? Like, even when they do the financial report in general conference, they don't say, like, here's how much money we have. And it seems like the filing reporting issue that we had to pay the fine on was all about that it was like they were hiding how much money is actually developed in the investments and what the properties were into the public domain. Do you have any thoughts about that? Why
I don't understand exactly the details of it. Like, I just know rough sketches.
Just in general.
Something like they have it's my understanding is it probably had to do with, like, you have to disclose how much money you make as a company, just in general. And the church the church has a corporation. That's who I work for, is the church's corporation side of things. And as a corporation, there are certain, like, legal requirements that you have to disclose. You know, how much money you had. And my understanding is the way they got around some of that disclosure was by investing it in their satellite companies like Deseret Industries and those different, like, things to, you know, try to, I don't know that they were, like, trying to avoid letting people know, or if they were just I don't know the details
or the specifics. Well, let me pull up this article real quick. I got to share my screen. Present screen. And shoot, window. This window.
I mean, all I saw was, like, KSL. I think I read a KSL news article because it's one of those, like, Mormon church, exactly, Mormon church pay fine, and it was like really catchy, and I read it and I was like, that's boring.
Well, I just want to read one part of this, and then we're going to read the church's actual statement. The church, this is CNN business page. The Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints and its investment manager will pay $5 million to settle regulatory charges that hid a huge investment fund. The Securities and Exchange Commission, that's the SEC, said Tuesday that Ensign Peak Advisors, the investment management firm that handles the LDS Church finances, failed to file forms that would have disclosed the value of certain church investments. Instead, the firm filed forms for shell companies, is what you were talking about, that obscured the church's portfolio and misstated the firm's control over the church's investment decisions, or the SEC said. And then there's a quote right here. And this is the part that's a little conflicting. But this says, to settle the charges, Ensign Peak, we'll read about them in just a second, agreed to pay $4 million of the $5 million, and the church paid $1 million in the penalty. And this is by Gruber. Can you see this? Did I even load this on the screen? I'm an idiot.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
I mean, it's a little small. But
it's small, yeah. He said, and he's from the SEC Division of Enforcement, he said in a news release, we allege that the LDS Church's investment manager, with the church's knowledge, went to great lengths to avoid disclosing the church's investments, depriving the commission and the invested public of accurate market information. So that has a tone as if that we're trying to hide how much money we have or whatever. And then the church said, as part of the statement, we affirm our commitment to comply with the law, regret the mistakes made, and now consider the matter closed. So now let's read.
It's interesting, though, right there. They try to tie it in with tithing. They're like, by the way, LDS members pay, and it's sort of, that's the kind of journalism that's sort of, not very,
it's not transparent. That's what they say.
Because it's like, by the way, but automatically your mind goes to, they're using the tithing of these poor people to do these investments, which isn't accurate.
So the statement, thanks for bringing that up. And this says right here, the members of the LDS Church are expected to donate 1/10 of their income to the church, a long-time practice known as tithing. That has nothing to do with this.
It's a very long time practice since it was practiced for 6,000 years.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
very long time practice.
Before we go into the church's statement, Lance, do you want to explain just kind of your concept about the difference between tithing dollars? Because this was paid, the church's statement says the fine is not paid with tithing dollars, it was paid from the investment dollars. So can you just explain the difference? What the difference is between tithing and the investment? I mean, from what you know or what you can.
Yeah, well, I know that the church has a lot of investments, like for instance in property. In fact, I think if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not going to say it just because I don't know 100% sure, but what I will say is that the church owns a lot of land in Florida, for example, a lot of land, and they own a lot of land just around the world, and for various reasons. Some of it is welfare related, like they have farms where they grow food.
Yeah. And ranches, cattle.
We're told to like save for a rainy day, basically, and not only as people, like as individual members, with like our food storage and like saving money in the bank for a rainy day or things like that. Like these are principles that the church teaches, but also the church as a whole, like as an organization, is also expected. Like we have huge bishop storehouses in California that serve the entire world during disasters, but anyway, all those things like sometimes generate money, just having land and selling it off, and there's a lot of things that the church like its mall in Salt Lake City, the property it owns, that makes money, and all those things make money, and they take that money and they invest it because you don't want to just put it in the bank.
Right.
And so they make a lot of money.
Right.
And then not only do they make a lot of money, but as we've been counseled in the scriptures, like in the Doctrine and Covenants, the church has been commanded to save money, just like we've been commanded to save money. Right. And so they have a lot of money.
So there's the investments, and then there's the business, the business side of the things the church has done. And at some point, obviously, some of that was initiated with tithing dollars. But I think a lot of, you may know better than me, it seems to me like a lot of the continuation of making investments and continuing business decisions and things that they do comes from them reusing the money that came back as profit from those ventures. So it seems like, and tithing dollars aren't
the church
really
is doing great right now.
Right.
The church is not suffering. Now, you also have to keep in mind that the church is constantly building temples that are very expensive all across the world. So the church, if you want to look at the churches, it depends on how you define investments. But if you want to look at all the property that the church owns, by the way, they try to pay everything off in cash. They don't go into debts to build these magnificent buildings and very, very expensive land. Like, for example, in Hong Kong, downtown Hong Kong, probably some of the most expensive real estate in the world. Yeah, they have a large building there. I'm sure it's worth a lot of money. So they don't make any money off from it. It's a chapel and a temple and stuff like that. But if you were like wanted to put a price tag on how much the church is worth, you could add that as an investment, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of language that gets thrown around, and everybody wants, everybody's really interested in knowing how much the church is worth, right? Because I mean, it's just, I am too. I'm curious.
But it's hard to, you can't really put like it's hard to put like a number on that, because you have there's two different sides of it, right? There's the organization of the church, like the things that keep the lights on in the chapel,
and that's paid by tithing. So tithing goes mostly to keeping the lights on, paying, the expenses that go into having those buildings, having churches and temples and things,
and building temples. And the temple fund, where people can specifically donate for that. Mission funds, or those are done through mostly for paid by the members, obviously. But then there's a separate missionary fund that people make donations to. But all these other investments, including, I am assuming, most of the working for the church and the church office building, the corporate side of the church functioning, that's mostly probably through investments and stuff.
Well, and it's sort of fascinating because you have. So, for instance, when they exposed how much the 70, can't remember his name, how much he made a year,
Yeah.
It's like $100,000, a little over $100,000. And members of the church might think, wow, that's a lot of money. But if you go to members of a mega church, they're like, that's it?
Yeah.
These people are only making that's like hardly anything.
Yeah,
So,
I was thinking about that recently. I was like, everyone made a big fuss about that, even if they're making 150.
well,
million
the members of the
like,
church might have, but I don't think I think when most people outside of the church heard that, they're like, "Oh darn, we can't get them on this."
Yeah, and they're exactly. They're like the members probably think they're just living on 30,000. They have their little apartment downtown, and they just they eat their little lunch.
And you got to understand that guy. That guy worked for the church for most of his career, if not all of it. And then in his retirement, he continued working. Only now he gets a stipend of $100,000 a year. He was probably making more when he was actually working for the church for money. And it's sort of.
I'm sure President Nelson, as a surgeon, and all the things that he's accomplished was probably way more than that.
There's plenty of leaders in the church now that are spending their retirement working basically 24/7.
Yeah, exactly right.
They could be making more money if they just went back to their professional pursuit.
Exactly right. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get to
I mean, to be fair though, across the board, I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure there's some people that, $100,000 is way more than they were making before.
Right. But again, that's just for their living, doing the full-time service in the church. It's not. They're not like on.
They're not partying.
Exactly. And that's not.
I don't want that job.
Yeah. All right. So this is the actual statement by the church. This came out February 23rd. It's, like I said, it's pretty short, and then they have some specific bullets that they answer some detailed questions, including like who is.
Oh, that looks interesting. What are Forms 13F? Ooh, let's get to that one.
Okay. All right, let's read this statement. The church released the following statement on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its affiliated investment manager, Ensign Peak Advisors Incorporated, have settled the matter with the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC. So they settled matters. This isn't something that just happened. This has been going for a while, and they just finally finished it up. Investment managers who oversee a portfolio of public equities above a certain threshold are required to file Forms 13F with the SEC quarterly. These forms publicly disclose the names of the securities and their value. So this is the public announcement of how much in the investments, who the investments are with, and how much they are for.
And it's interesting because they mentioned in there if they only have to do it if it's above a certain threshold.
Right.
And so I think that's what they did is they saw, there's this threshold. Well, we'll divest our money into these other satellite companies or
that might be it.
Now you did it or into these so that it doesn't go over that threshold.
Right. That's possible. Yeah. So this says since 2000. Ensign Peak received and relied upon legal counsel regarding how to comply with its reporting obligations while attempting to maintain the privacy of the portfolio. So Ensign Peak, this other company, was trying to, who we were working with, they were trying to keep it not sketchy, but they're trying to figure out how they could just maintain the privacy of the portfolio as much as possible. As a result, Ensign, and they were seeking legal advice and following legal advice with whoever that was to do so. As a result, Ensign Peak established a separate companies, LLCs, that each filed Forms 13F instead of a single aggregated filing. So they divvied it up and they had smaller groups doing it.
Yeah, Ensign, and that's the thing about these things is, so you got two camps, right? You've got the camp of this is what's legal, and then you've got the camp of this is what's right or wrong.
Okay.
And then maybe a third camp, which is like this is what's right and wrong for the church, right?
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
And so like legally it was probably in a gray area where it's like some companies get away with this and some don't. And so my guess is they were like, hey, you should do this because we'll probably be okay.
I was going to say, I would argue it was not that they were doing anything like bending on illegal, but they were doing something incorrectly and probably out of
the IRS's the tax laws are so insanely complicated that it's not as black and white as you would like to think. And anyway, once we finish reading this, I'll get into my opinion. But whether it's right or wrong, that gets into my opinion, and so I'll say that for later.
That's fair. That's fair.
Legally, I don't think it was like, oh wow. But this is a big subject because the bigger elephant in the room is, especially in the United States, is this push for making churches taxable.
Yeah.
Churches.
That's true. Okay. Well, let's finish this. So, and that's why I was bringing up your thoughts on why they keep those things private and the why that's concerned. Because that seems to be all what it is. Is just they're trying to keep it private. But anyway, so as a result, Ensign Peak established or separate companies. They each filed Form 13F instead of a single aggregated filing. Ensign Peak and the church believed that all securities required to be reported were included in the filings by the separate companies. So they thought they were good. But in June of 2019, the SEC first expressed concern about the Ensign Peak's reporting approach, and Ensign Peak adjusted its approach and began filing in single. So they immediately fixed it. They began filing single aggregated report. Since that time, 13 quarterly reports have been filed in full accordance with the SEC requirements. So they found the error.
So this is like they're busting him from something that happened
a while ago. Yeah.
I wonder what year it was. Oh, it says right there, 2019. So 3 years ago.
No. 2019 is when they first expressed a concern, but it seems like this had been going on since 2000. Since 2000, for 19 years, they were filing it, or transitioning into the way they were filing it wrong.
And then in 2019, the SEC said, "Hey, you guys shouldn't be doing that." Yes. So the church changed it
immediately. Yeah. Since then, 13 quarterly reports. Yeah. Says this settlement relates to how the forms were filed previously. So this isn't like, oh, they busted us this week, we had to pay a fine. No, this was something that began.
They finally uncovered us.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's just taken this time. It says Ensign Peak and the church have cooperated with the government over a period of time as we sought resolution.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because SEC is federal government, isn't it? My guess is. And so I wonder how much of this is political. Because
maybe, let's hold off on that for a second. The last statement here is what we read in CNN. We affirm our commitment to comply with the law, regret mistakes made, and now consider this matter closed.
Which is just the PR department talking.
Yeah. But it's not true because if this was something they were really doing that was sketchy, and they were like, oh no, they're on to us, they would have fought harder to keep it quiet or whatever, but they were being transparent, and people might look at this and say, well, how come the church didn't say something about it in 2019? Well, what was there to say in 2019? The fine wasn't initiated, so it's like they were just doing the investigation. We were complying and we were working with it.
Well, I have some opinions about it and stuff, but let's finish.
Okay, let's
I want to finish the Q&A.
So that's the main statement. So here's a few.
It looks very. I want to find out what all these forms mean.
Okay, so some of the big ones. What is Ensign Peak Advisors? It's an affiliated investment manager for the church. Who is the SEC? Securities and Exchange Commission regulates the United States securities markets. It has a board jurisdiction.
So it's interesting that they say it is an affiliated investment manager for the church. So I wonder if our 401ks are handled by Ensign Peak Advisors. And so that would be interesting.
Talk about employees of the church.
Because actually, we're the church corporation is a nonprofit corporation, and I don't know if all churches are nonprofits. Right. I'm not sure if that's how they're filed, but
yeah. Okay. Did the church know about the practices that Ensign Peak described in the order? The church's senior leadership received and relied upon legal counsel when it approved of the use of an external companies to make the filings. So they knew what was happening, and they received legal counsel.
That's one thing that a lot of people, I think the majority of people in the church don't even realize the church has a corporation.
Yes.
They probably don't care. They don't think that much about it.
They just think the business is like wards. It's just like magic. It's just magically tied together.
And when you think about, and this is what a lot of people outside of the church don't understand, like they think we're run like every other church, but I think there's some big differences how things are run. When you talk about the leadership of the church, the leadership of the church does make financial decisions, but most of those financial decisions are sort of like not their main thing. Like they are dedicated to the spiritual side of the church, to the ministry that they're doing. They're not dedicated to, how can we make more money? And where should we put our investments? Like they don't want to do that, for one thing. So they shovel all that off onto the
head leadership. Yeah, they're depending on people that are called, like the presiding bishopric, working with hired employees who are just experts in those fields, who are trying their best to give them the best information, and then the leading authorities in the church approve.
Right.
And
but there's I think there's a bigger separation there than people realize.
Yeah.
Like these are apostles and prophets and seers and revelators. Like they're not spending their time in legal minutia and all that kind of stuff.
You don't think President Heaney and President
handle that?
Yeah, you don't think they were in the Holy of Holies in the Salt Lake Temple and they were praying about these investments? No. Yeah. So this said, like we said, the senior leadership received and relied upon the legal counsel. Ensign Peak handled the mechanics of the filing process. The church's senior leadership never prepared or filed specific reports at issue. Now, that's not to say
President Nelson wasn't at home filing tax reports.
But that's just saying they weren't the ones actually doing it. But that's not to say they're completely washing their hands of it.
They do have a big picture. They get briefed on that kind of thing.
Right.
I'm sure. I mean, I don't know exactly, but I'm sure they do.
Has the reporting practice that prompted the SEC cease and desist order now stopped? Yes. As of June 2019, 3 or 4 years ago, the SEC first expressed concern about Ensign's reporting approach. Ensign Peak adjusted its approach, began filing singularly, and since then we had 13, like we just read that. Okay. Did Ensign Peak fail to comply with the regulations? Well, we reached resolution with the SEC. We affirm our commitment to comply with the law, regret mistakes made, now consider the matter closed. When will the penalties be paid? The penalties will be paid shortly to the U.S. Treasury, because the church just has
to they have plenty of money. They're not going to be like, well, we'll have to dig in our piggy banks and
cancel the temple in Peru. We got to They just have to figure out where it's going to come from specifically, I'm sure. And this is the important one. Where does the $5 million come from to satisfy the settlement? The investment returns of the church will be used to pay the settlement, not tithing dollars. The investment returns, the profit we make from those investments.
Right.
And that's
it's not. I mean, it is gonna. It's not an insignificant amount, I'm sure, but at the same time, it's not gonna like break the church in any financial way.
Okay. Next question: how are the church's reserves invested? This is important, or this is interesting. Following the principle of preparing for the future, this is what you were talking about, both near and long term, the church maintains diversified reserves, including stocks, bonds, commercial and residential real estate, and agricultural properties. All funds are invested solely to support the church's mission. President Nelson doesn't have some fancy ranch out in Montana that the church owns that he goes camping on and stuff like that. That's not what they do. And why did the settlement take place now? We have worked with the SEC for years, since 2019, to come to this settlement. We reached resolution and chose not to prolong the matter. And the last one is, will this settlement impact Ensign Peak's ability to continue to make investments? No. With the announcement in order, the matter is closed. So the church, if the church felt like this was some kind of a black mark or something, or a scandal that they had to be like, we need to like clear ourselves from, there would have been a change in that. But there was nothing that was wrong. They apparently, I'm sure the church, ever since 2019, I imagine the church was paying much closer attention, and they were watching how they're doing, and they watched the changes, made sure they felt comfortable with it. Maybe that's when President Nelson and those did get a little more involved in just making sure, got more legal counsel, more concentrated legal counsel, and made sure everything else was going okay. And then they moved forward, and there's been no other issues.
Yeah, I don't think this is like an issue that they're like, oh man, we really screwed up on this one, and we better hide it up. And in the next 4 years, we're going to have to like do our best and hire a PR group. And it was to them, it was probably like, oh shoot, we didn't check the right box on the tax, and now we paid for it. And so
no, it's a little more complicated than that, but yeah.
It was probably just like, oh yeah, we messed up. and let's move on with.
Yeah, we have more important things to worry about than be like, oh no, the church is.
And I wonder, like if we're going to talk about conspiracy theories, because I'm sure everyone's got a conspiracy theory about this. My conspiracy theory is like, I know there was a guy that was bitter about this that left church employment. I think he was either church employment. I don't think it was church employment. I think it was one of those investment firms employment or something. And I don't know the details, but he wasn't happy. And he's like, look at the church and look what they're doing. And they're not telling us things. And he complained about it. And I'm sure that sort of sparked some of this with the press.
I really don't understand why. Like, why would I need to go? For example, why would I need, if I was curious, let's say I lived in a really wealthy ward, I would be like, hey, Bishop, how much did the ward pay in tithing last month? Well, that's not my business. You know what I mean? Like, why do I need to know other than to make sure it was managed properly?
So here's the thing, and then this gets into, okay, we talked about legal and not legal, and apparently, according to the SEC, they broke the law in this one thing, and the IRS is actually, I don't know if the IRS is involved in this, but the government entities are usually pretty good with companies. They'll usually warn them, which is what it sounds like happened here.
That's what happened.
You guys messed up. You shouldn't be doing that. The church immediately changed. And
says, we've been working with them for 4 years to make the settlement.
Right. And so, bygones be gone. And we hear the $1 million, and I have no clue, like, how much money the church has. I honestly have no clue.
Right.
But to them, like $1 million is probably chump change. Like in terms of the rest of their investments.
Back to the CNN report. This said this again. Who knows where this comes from? But the LDS Church was concerned that disclosure of its portfolio, which by 2018 had grown approximately $32 billion. This is the investments.
So you do the math out. What percentage is 1 million of 32 billion? And that's probably only talking about investments. And again, what does investments mean? Does that count all of their property? Is that like
assets, or is that just the stocks, or is that just a profit? Like who knows? That's why
the truth is probably no one has actually done all that math. It's just a guesstimate. When you start hitting the billions, then. But
that number itself probably freaks people out. Why would we have $30 billion in investment, or $32 billion? And they're like, of course we're hiding it from the government. That's like the red flag.
Well, so we talked about legal, right? Then you get into moral, run of the mill morals. I'm not talking about religious morals. I'm just talking run of the mill morals that everyone has. Is it moral that the church has that much money and doesn't tell people about it? I think that there's an argument to be said, like the church should. And not just the church, but all churches. I think that there's a lot of secret money in all of the churches that needs to be exposed.
I'm not challenging you, but when you say that, is it so that people, when they, like people in other churches that see their pastors or whatever driving around in like really fancy cars with really silky big fur coats and everything, that they know how much money is actually going into, and the bling bling? Like, is that what you're referring to know that they're not living like that?
I mean, I think that there should be anytime there's money, there's corruption. Doesn't matter if you're a church, doesn't matter if you're a government, doesn't matter.
I agree with that.
Now, what level that corruption is at, and big or small, like in the church, there's corruption all the time. People get excommunicated. We don't say that anymore, right? But some people have done things with tithing money they shouldn't have done, and they get kicked out of the church or whatever you want to call it. That happens. I don't know how frequently, but even in my own life, I've seen that happen. We're talking about it's just a member of the church.
We're talking about the conduct of the heads. What is your opinion, or what does this say to you about how the heads, were they not walking the walk, or were they being hypocritical with the standards they say the members should do? Because when the financial department does a report, to a certain extent,
they were trying to get around laws. Now, you can argue those are bad laws, or you can argue about, churches shouldn't be taxed.
There's not clarity.
Which is another thing. Like, should churches be taxed? That's a very, very good subject. Like, you could go on forever, and I don't feel like qualified to like express too much of an opinion on it. But I can't say for 100% that I don't think churches should be taxed. I think maybe they should. And in some countries, I know we are because of their laws, and the church is
Well,
taxed.
that's a
I
big
mean,
history with
when you drive
Scientology.
when you drive to church, are you not driving on roads that were paid by taxes? Are you
Right.
not using the water system that was, there's
Right.
and of course, I guess the argument when those laws were originally established was, well, churches provide a service to the community, and so they should be tax free. And
yeah, it's not a bit. They're not in there for profit. They're in there
Right.
for service. Yes, for the return of the people. Yeah, that's a big history, or part of the history of the Scientology. I know that was a big thing when they fight back.
Yeah, they won it used to be the largest lawsuit in the United States was won by the Church of Scientology because they were trying to sue them for not paying taxes, and those guys were definitely making profit.
Yeah,
it was not just going to their buildings. And
well, let's just wrap this up with a little bit of a spiritual note. The people are seeing these headlines. I'm sure they're seeing the numbers like 32 billion. They're getting freaked out. They're thinking that this is just more the church hiding how much money it really has and not doing enough good with it, or thinking that a bunch of that's going to the general authorities or whatever.
Well, but before you get into your spiritual thing, Tim, I do think the church should be more transparent. And I actually see this as a positive thing for the church. And I look forward to maybe it changing some of its policies about transparency. And I think there's a lot of members that think the church can do no wrong. But of course the church can do wrong and make mistakes. It made a mistake on this. And that doesn't mean that like President Nelson is no longer a prophet. Like, again, that side of the church is like, yeah, sure, he oversaw things. And he could have maybe received revelation that we shouldn't have done that or whatever. But I don't see that as his main role. And I don't see that as like furthering the cause of Christ in the world, which is what his focus is.
It's like what you said when we had our discussion about the race and the priesthood and the policy to withhold it from the Negroes and everything. You said that did this policy, this change for this policy that was in place for 100 years, did it bring about the downfall of the church? No. Whether or not it was right or wrong, whatever, that conversation is in that episode. But like even this, like, did this bring down the church? Did this suffer or sacrifice an entire temple? Or are people on the other side going to be withheld blessings or delayed opportunities in the temple because of this stuff? No, everything is still functioning, and yeah, there are setbacks, and the church is going to have to make some adjustments to get that money back, or whatever departments are going to get sacrifices because of the money coming out of those funds. Changes are going to have to happen, and things will be tight.
I think that there's a cultural thing in the
still
church.
Going.
There's a cultural thing in the church, and I understand why, because the churches in a lot of areas in a lot of countries are very poor, and when people hear, "Oh, you have $30 billion," it causes issue for the church. For a good example is in Africa. Okay, one of the problems we had in Africa is you build a chapel there, right? Those chapels are nice buildings, put a lot of money into them and stuff, and the leaders are like, "No, don't build those chapels." And like, why not? Is it because now it becomes a target because it's a rich building in there. People are going to come in, they're going to steal stuff. They're going to be like, "Oh, $30 billion. Oh, let's go." And they're easy, easy prey. And if we steal from them, it's not going to hurt anything. And, so there are issues and there are reasons to be non-transparent. At the same time, I think the church has sort of an attitude of, it wasn't that long ago the church was being persecuted by the federal government. I mean, it was 100+ years ago. But still, we have long memories.
It was a very different government at the time too.
But I think that, especially recently, and it goes back to the articles that they shared, handling blacks in the priesthood and those other hot topics. Like, I think that the church will do itself a favor by just coming out and being more transparent and honest about things, because sooner or later it's going to get found out anyway.
Well,
it's better coming from the leadership than from CNN.
Because they're skewed. I don't know. I would just push back. I'm not saying that you that's totally what you think it should. You think it would do some good. I'm just saying this is not an apologist perspective or my attitude. I don't just apologize for anything, my consideration, as soon as I saw the headlines, I'm, whatever, and I moved on until people were asking me about it. But I was like, even now, even after talking to you with your thoughts about transparency, it doesn't do me any good to know how much they have. It doesn't change my, like, when they start doing reports on how many temples we have, or how much was all the humanitarian efforts we do, how much money was donated to this hurricane disaster zone. Like, I'm not like, well, we had 32 billion. Why did they only send that much? I'm like, why do we have Relief Society activities where they're sewing kits together for humanitarian aid when they can just go buy them? I don't have any different attitude towards that stuff than I did before seeing the numbers of the investments, which, again, what does that mean? Is that their properties they already own, or is that like their profit or whatever? It doesn't say anything. Yeah. And it doesn't change anything for me for how the church is being run, or what those financial reports mean, or the spirit in which they're delivered when they say, President Nelson, we want to promise you that the best we're being responsible as possible, and they're trying to live the standards that they expect the members to, like you said. That is all still perfectly intact for me without knowing the actual dollar signs. I have faith in the presidency. I have faith in the presiding bishopric, and I have faith in they're doing their best with their businesses. And no matter what, they're profitable, like you said. Great. Keep it up. When they stop doing fast offerings, when they stop building temples, then I'll be like, well, where's this money going?
Yeah. And all of a sudden they start wearing bling in general conference. They got like gold things.
They wear Van Heusens. They wear what I'm wearing. I know that for a fact they wear Van Heusens. Like, they're not even buying like expensive deluxe suit. Oh, whatever. Anyway, and you've seen their pictures. They don't have like really crazy fancy ties either. Just saying.
Well, and I have a strong testimony of the tithing and the fast offering system of the church. And this was before I worked for him. After working for him, I know for sure, like, we have top men, but we really do. We have some of the best people in the world, handling the finances. And finances are always going to be difficult to handle. Again, where there's money, there's corruption. It doesn't matter where you go or what organization.
And suspicions.
But I would trust the church's ability to handle that above any other organization.
Right.
The government, for sure. I mean, we
right.
know.
Yeah. What is the government going to do?
What happened to those $1 billion that suddenly disappeared during the war? And
what's the government going to do with those $5 million?
And I'm not making excuses for the church. I'm just saying that there's no financial institution I would trust above the church, and I put my money where my mouth is. I have opportunities when I have extra money to give to the poor. And this is where I'm different than you, Tim. You give to the transients. You give to I don't, and this is why I trust the church more than even the Red Cross, and even like some of these organizations that, in fact, I'll even tell you this, that we've been encouraged to give to this organization. I'm trying to remember what it's called, the United Way. We've been encouraged by the presiding bishopric to give to the United Way, because it's like one of those service organizations that we do a lot of things hand in hand in. I'm not giving my money to the United Way. I researched them a little bit, and I don't trust their CEO. There's some sketchy things about him that I don't agree with. I'm not giving my money to those people. I give my money in fast offerings to the church, and if I want to support a cause, I'll give more money to fast offerings, or I'll give more money to something. That's
the best.
The reason is because I know how responsible they are, and I know how much better run they are than any other organization.
There was an awesome talk by President Eyring like 10 years ago. I don't remember how long ago, and he was talking about, I think his talk was about prayer or whatever, but he shared the story in the beginning of his talk where he was like watching the TV and he was seeing this disaster or something on the other side of the world, and how he was comforted and felt so blessed that he could do something and help because of his fast offerings, that he knew that the donations he was making, I'm sure he pays a lot and lives in a neighborhood that doesn't require a lot of usage of those fast offerings, that was going to be part of a pool of money that was going to be utilized to help people in a humanitarian effort all over the world. Right. And that's a big deal. The spirit of the fast offerings, the whole concept of the widow's two mites. My tithing dollars are not as much as a lot of people's tithing dollars, and my fast offerings I don't have a whole lot. Okay, I'm not gonna make excuses. I could pay a lot more fast offerings, but though what I do contribute goes to a greater good than anyone else, including myself, my own discernment, trying to be responsible with that money.
And part of that really attracts me to donating to the church is, 100% of that goes to the cause.
Right.
And all these other companies are like, well, we have 20% admin costs and all this other stuff. The admin costs of the church are paid by these investments.
Yes, exactly.
They're not paid by fast offerings. They're not paid by tithing. And so, like, again, like
I tease you all the time whenever we go to lunch and stuff, and I'm like, oh, my tithing dollars paid for your lunch and stuff. I joke about that, but it's not.
It's not true.
Not yeah.
So it's sort of silly to me, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I hope that, I don't know if that helped anyone. If anyone has any thoughts or issues, this is definitely not. It should not be a faith challenging announcement or anything. This is a
smear campaign, really, is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, and everyone, organized religion is an interesting thing because it's always a conspiracy theory, and some of them are correct. Like, if you ask me about another church, I'd probably, like the Scientologists, man, I would go on a smear campaign against them because I think their stuff is crazy, and I'm sure other people look at our church the same way. So I have to admit, I'm biased. We're biased, towards the church. We have a bias,
that's going to be out of a lot of ignorance because we only know so much from the outside perspective about those organizations. But
here's the thing that Elder Ty, my friend, Elder Ben Tai, said that I just thought was hilarious. But there's a big, right now in our time in history, there's a big conflict against any kind of organized religion. Like organized religion, the rising generation is like, we're against organized religion. Well, he was sort of over some of the disaster relief that was happening in the Midwest and in the United States during hurricanes, the recent hurricanes and things like that. When I say recent, like 4 or 5 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe sooner, but roughly. And he said, when you go to these places, everyone's against organized religion until there's a disaster. And then they're like, man, I'm sure glad someone has an organized relief program for these kind of things. So
exactly right. And I'm grateful that the church does. I mean, people are looking at this in this aspect of hypocrisy. I'm so glad that the church is responsible and has reserves of money that we don't have to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that we can let our guard down and be irresponsible. But I mean, I don't have to have
President Snow.
I was going to say that
when he was like talking about, man, how are we going to pay off all these church debts that we owe? And he was so worried about it, man. He was like losing sleep over it.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what he'd think if he saw our day? He'd be like, oh man, we're finally doing things right. And some people are like mad about that.
Yeah.
That we've saved.
Like, you have so much money. Yeah. It's like you can't operate if you give away all the money, and you have to be responsible and you can't just make temple announcements and start, breaking ground and making plans, urban development plans and stuff without having money in reserve ready to take care of that and make adjustments as necessary. You can't just donate everything except for a temple fund and then just hope nothing comes up. I mean, I don't know the details or how much it costs to run the church. I never will, and I don't want to know. But I have faith in the hands that are taking care of it. And this was something that happened. It seemed like it was negligence. It was not something sketchy. They weren't trying to they weren't stealing or anything like that. They were just trying to keep privacy on how much funds they have. I personally see some reasons for that. You do too, but you lean more towards hoping that they get more transparent in the future. Maybe they will. I don't think that'd be the worst thing at all. But I'm just saying I can see why they would. And as a member, I don't care how much they have. I trust them. But that's me out of blind faith, though. I don't expect everyone to have that perspective. And that's not a superiority comment at all. But I know it's in the right place. And this article, it doesn't shake me up. The church is doing what they can. And I'm sure Ensign is taking a majority of the responsibility, and that's why they're paying more of the fine. I can't see the church being like, well, we're only going to pay $1 million. You guys have to pay the $4 million because you're the ones that were filling out the reports. The church was oversight, and had oversight, and there was decisions that were made. So learn from it, move on, and just the church, just like us, they can repent. and we make corrections, we make restitution, and then we move forward. So I hope anyone that has questions or concerns about this article or this statement, this incident, they can do the same thing and just have forgiveness, compassion, and move on and just keep your faith in the church. And if you struggle with that, then there's other things to focus on besides this to get that foundation in your faith. Then you can exercise prayer and see if everything's okay in the management of the funds in the church. But anything else you want to say, Lance?
I mean, just what you're talking about, I was like, man, if this is a hang up of yours, then you got worse problems.
Problems is not the right word, but there's other things that there's probably other hang-ups that are probably more pressing than this. Right. I can see this being a big deal.
Of course, we're only saying that as part of the cover-up, Tim.
Yeah. I don't make any money off these investments.
No, I have 100% confidence in that the tithing money is being handled in the best way possible, considering just the crazy kind of difficulty it is. I mean, we have financial systems in Russia that are different because their laws is different in Russia. There's just so much complicated stuff going on that, to me, it's a miracle in and of its own, the way the church has stayed alive, stayed afloat, stayed on the good graces of governments and all these different. It's a worldwide church. I mean, this is a Utah thing, right? This little Utah United States thing. The crazy complexity of it throughout the world is just amazing, and I'm grateful for all the people that work so hard on making sure the church's finances are like in order, and they are very dedicated and they're very faithful, and this is the kingdom of God. Like, there's no doubt about it, and that doesn't mean that the kingdom of God is perfected. If it was, then we would be up in heaven already, and we're not. So there's going to be rough spots, and there's going to be things that need to be fixed, and it's been that way in the past. So if you think this is something new, you study your church history. And if you think that this is like a testimony breaking experience, then you got a lot of rough times ahead of you. There's bigger issues. I just want to end with sharing one of my favorite memes of all time. I'm not a meme guy. My kids can tell you that, but this is one of my favorites. Mormons doing more with 10% than the government can do with 50%. It's absolutely true. I don't know about that. I think we love to talk trash about the government, but yeah.
Anyway, I'll just end this. I just wanted to testify that the church is still true. This isn't anything that's shaken my faith. There are things I think could make me have bigger questions than this did. Transparency, opinions aside, the church is doing what they're doing with the best that they can do to know they're doing their best to do what they feel is right, and changes have to happen. The church goes through not weaknesses, but the church makes mistakes, has to make restitution just like all of us. And I just hope again that we can all have compassion on that. So Lance, thanks for giving us your insight and your perspective. I appreciate that you're able and willing to talk with me about these complex, difficult, hot fire topics. But people do have legitimate questions. I'm not trying to underplay that. So hope this helped anyone, and if not, go to your knees. Go to your knees, ask Heavenly Father. Just ask for that reassurance of faith, and just study the works and look into the things that the church does do with its funds, with humanitarian efforts and the construction of the church and the temples, and what that work is. And just consider how much that costs. Doesn't matter, but it's going forth, and I'm glad that we can pay our tithings and that the church can operate with those investments, not having to take from the tithing. Like Lance said, it goes to the work. I know it does, and I testify of that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.